KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM, KSQT Prunedale 89.7 FM, and translator K208GE Monterey 89.5 FM.
The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. In square miles, Santa Cruz County is the second smallest in the state, and yet with its gorgeous coastline, popular beaches, and more miles of mountain biking trails than any other county in the United States, the Santa Cruz region packs an intensity of natural beauty and ways to experience it that few areas can rival, and its state park system can be considered a jewel in its crown. Our show today features the Mountain Parks Foundation, which was inspired by a growing body of research showing the strong link between contact with nature and enhanced human wellness. The Mountain Parks Foundation offers a dynamic program of workshops and events that all take place within the sheltering beauty of Mother Nature herself, and it's called Redwood RX. Here to tell us all about it is the Mountain Parks Foundation Executive Director, Brenda Holmes. Brenda, thank you so much for coming down to the studio today to talk with us.
Thank you, Christine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brenda, would you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us how you came into your role at the Mountain Parks Foundation?
Sure, I'd love to. So I am a native Santa Cruz Countyan, if that's a word, and I actually grew up in Boulder Creek. And when I graduated from high school, the first thing I did was leave and go live in the big city for 25 years. And it was during that time that I really grew to appreciate the natural beauty and just the wonder of having grown up in such a beautiful environment. And I moved back with my family. When I moved back, I left my career, which at that time was in the insurance industry, and came back to Boulder Creek and realized that it was a great time for a break. And I sort of looked around to see where I might be able to bring my skills and be helpful. And as timing sometimes works, Mountain Parks Foundation, which was a local nonprofit that supports Henry Cowell and Big Basin Redwood State Parks, was in the process of transitioning to a new executive director. And so I picked up on that cue from the universe.
Yay.
And so that's my next role. And so this was 12 and a half, 13 years ago. Since that time, I've had the pleasure of working with all of the many people who've supported our parks and Mountain Parks Foundation.
You know, Santa Cruz has that kind of slingshot gravity. Many of us leave and we just end up coming back. I share that history. So welcome back.
Thank you.
You know, as you were speaking with our DJ, Andy Furman, and he was like, what's the Mountain Parks Foundation? I've never heard of it. There's probably a lot of people who haven't. And that's why we brought you in here. It sounds like an extremely valuable organization. So give us a little of its history and mission.
Thank you for asking. And you're right. Mountain Parks Foundation has been around for over 50 years, and we have quietly been providing support to our two state park partners at Henry Cowell and Big Basin. But we've realized in the past 10 years that being quiet is not always in our best interest, since folks don't really know what goes on behind the scenes to help fill in some of the gaps in funding that state parks chronically struggles with. So our role as a nonprofit partner of state parks is to raise money to support those two parks, specifically in their educational programs. And I use educational as a broad term. It's really everything that the visitors come and experience and learn about and absorb and see when they're inside our parks. And that can be everything from brick and mortar visitor centers to interpretive programs, to campfire programs for folks who come and camp and they are entertained by the lovely docents who do the programs on Saturday evenings. The signage that you find in the parks, those are interpretive educational signs that Mountain Parks Foundation supports. And we also do large-scale fundraising for things like nature museums. And I'm stopping there because that was our last big capital campaign, which we had undertaken prior to 2020. And that was up at Big Basin.
A rough year and a terrifying year.
Yeah, rough for many reasons, starting with COVID and
Right.
all the havoc that wreaked on our individual lives and our work lives and our psyches.
And very few visitors to the parks. And then,
well,
yeah.
actually,
Oh,
it's
really?
interesting.
Did it
That's
increase?
and
Please
and
disabuse me.
let me do that.
Thank you. That happens all the time.
It actually was surprising to us too, because I know for those listeners who grew up here or who were here in 2020, it's not a surprise to remember back what life was like when COVID first hit and all the fear and isolation that we all experienced and the feeling of being trapped in our homes by ourselves. However, state parks were one of the few places that actually remained open. Most of them did. And so we as individuals started to discover those places freshly. And we really had a chance to see how valuable and what a big part they play in our lives in just keeping us grounded, keeping our mental sanity, having a place to go and be out in nature that we could still access during COVID was huge. So that was the start. That was sort of the seed that was planted in Mountain Parks and California State Parks' brains about what we could offer that would be new, that would be beneficial for our local community and for others. And that blossomed into Redwood RX, which I know we're going to be talking about, but I'll stop here.
Thank you so much because, 2020 was just massive. And I grew up in this area, in Boulder Creek, and the shock and the loss around Big Basin was huge.
Yeah, and I'll say it was a quadruple whammy for us because, as I mentioned, we had just completed raising almost $2 million for the capital campaign to completely renovate the historic building that the Nature Museum was housed in up at Big Basin. We'd hired a company, we and State Parks had hired a company to do the new exhibits and create a brand new interactive museum. And it was scheduled to open at the end of 2020. And just at the beginning of the year, we moved back into that historic building, all of the artifacts that had been safely sequestered up in Sacramento, preparing for the exhibits to be built out. We were all excited. And yes, COVID hit, and we were finding ways to keep the project going. And then on August 18th, and I remember that day because it was my birthday, we got word that the CZU fire was completely overtaking the park. And we know the history of that, but I don't know if everyone knows that that fire destroyed 97% of the park, including every single one but one of the historic buildings, including our Nature Museum. So
you're newly renovated.
Yes. So
goodness.
it was devastating. The fire was devastating, period. But this was just one more level of devastation for us as an organization and for our partner State Parks that really had a lot invested in everything up there, but in that project as well.
Right. So now I have a million questions. But listeners, in case you have just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD 90.7 FM in Santa Cruz and 89.5 and 89.7 from Watsonville down to King City. And my guest is Brenda Holmes. She is the executive director of the Mountain Parks Foundation. And we were just discussing how you had raised a capital campaign of $2 million for a mostly volunteer run, nonprofit is a massive accomplishment. And to have that go up in smoke, I can only imagine the difficulty. More, and of course the loss of the trees, that was so heartbreaking. So may I ask where is it all at now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right. It was heartbreaking and there was tremendous loss. First in the natural wonders that were contained at Big Basin, but then in the history that had been preserved and was being celebrated in this new museum. It was Mountain Parks Foundation that led that campaign, but we had many organizational partners, and California State Parks was a primary partner of ours, so it was a loss that we shared. So where are we now? I think that started us back at ground zero. And after the fire, our community as a whole really was reeling in many different ways. And so our organization took a look at, boy, what have we just gone through? The focus that we had been planning up at Big Basin now had to be averted, and we wanted to take on something new that would be meaningful. We were hopeful that the museum would become a reality, but we knew that it was going to be at some distant point in the future. And I'll say that specific to Big Basin, there is an ongoing project right now called Reimagining Big Basin that is going forward, and it has been in progress for since the fire. And there are plans being made for reimagining that park in wonderful new ways that are going to capitalize on all that remains and its history and really focus on some new areas. So we're hopeful there will be a museum in the future, and maybe I'll come back on this radio station and talk about our next capital campaign.
All right.
Yeah,
Great. Okay.
but in the meantime,
And
and remembering that this also happened during COVID
yes,
years,
right.
which just meant we were all kind of blindsided and shocked and looking around us to see what was real. We started to think about how much nature was playing a role for us. I say us as an organization, but I'll talk more specifically about me as an individual too. I really realized how much I counted on my surroundings, the natural beauty of living in a redwood forest, to just go out and be grounding and re-energizing, and to remind us that there's a bigger world out there and that life cycles happen, and they look pretty devastating on the outside, but they also are the ground where new things grow and blossom. Mm-hmm. And as we were thinking about this, the concept for a brand new program called Redwood RX was born. And our state park partner and Mountain Parks Foundation joined together, and we came up with the idea of offering nature-based wellness programs that people could come to our parks and experience for themselves. Little bite-sized pieces of, in many different flavors, of what that feels like to partner with nature in life and kind of do creative things and rejuvenate and experience the outdoors in a whole new way. Mm. So that was our phoenix that rose from those particular ashes.
It's such a wonderful story, and yeah. I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I invited you in here, Stephen. And this is true of almost all the stories that we do here, or speak for myself. Mm-hmm. You know, I invite a guest in, and then I get to go on an amazing adventure and find mm-hmm. out the story behind, that little blurb that we can read, which in this case is at www.mountainparks.org. You'll see the Redwood RX program there and many other really interesting details. And so to give a flavor, I was wondering if we could maybe walk through the offerings that Redwood RX is presenting for the month of August, just so our listeners can understand how dynamic and interesting an adventure they could have just in the month of August alone. And these are kind of ongoing almost every month, right? Is it 12 months out of the year?
Actually, our season, this is only our second season.
Oh, congratulations.
So our program has grown tremendously since its first season last year, and it will continue to grow as mm-hmm. it evolves. Mm-hmm. And so it's running from April through October right now, and mostly because of weather concerns.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, good. So we're at the height of the season, August.
We are.
August offerings for Redwood RX through the Mountain Parks Foundation. And these are all at Henry Cowell?
No, most of them are at Henry Cowell mm-hmm. or Fall Creek, Henry Cowell's subunit. Mm-hmm. Many locals think that's a separate state park, but it actually isn't. It's a mm-hmm. part of Henry Cowell. Mm-hmm. And we also have a few offerings up at Big Basin.
Oh, great. So, okay, good.
Yeah, right. So in August, we are offering native animal portraits. It's a pastel painting class in Henry Cowell. We have...
Oh, wait, and that's August 10th.
Oh, yes.
And for example, it's a 2-hour class. It goes from 2 to 4.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
We're offering Connecting with the Forest, also in Henry Cowell, on August 13th. It's a 2-hour experience from 1 to 3. Mm-hmm. We've got Sunset Yoga up.
Ooh, that's romantic.
Yeah, it actually is. It's beautiful, and it's surprisingly serene to be out on the observation deck in Henry Cowell, for those who visited there. That's on August 15th from 5:30 to 7:30 that evening.
That's a Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very tempted. I'm like, ooh, that's getting me kind of tingling. I'm like, ooh, get your yoga mat. You got to do a little hike to get up there.
You do a little hike to get up there. It's led by a very experienced instructor who leads some of us, or some mindful experiences on the way up.
Sweet.
We also have yoga in nature, and that is a morning experience happening on Friday, August 16th inside Henry Cowell's main use area.
Okay.
A little different.
Mm-hmm. And
on
then you
Go ahead.
Walk with the Doc, I'm all excited about, right?
Yeah,
That's
Walk
on
with the
7th?
Doc is fantastic. And this is Dr. Stephen Lieb. For those who are local may remember him. He retired not so long ago from practice here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And he offers a program once a month in Henry Cowell where you're walking with him and hearing about nature, but also well-being topics that are very timely, and it's just a great experience with a whole different twist.
And is that a pretty easy walk for?
Very easy walk, accessible to everyone. It's
Great.
for the most part around the Redwood Loop in Henry Cowell and its environment, if people know that area.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably even handicap accessible.
Yes,
walk.
it is.
Sweet. Okay.
And I know that Dr. Lieb can make some course alterations depending on who comes and what the physical needs are as well.
That's awesome. Okay.
Also in August, I know a prior guest on your show,
Yes.
Kai Seidenberg, is giving a class in Fall Creek, which is the subunit of Henry Cowell. That's a 2-hour nature-based mindfulness mini retreat, and I've been on that one myself with Kai. It's a fantastic, wonderful experience.
Yeah, she's a special lady, and
She
folks,
really is.
stay tuned because I have an interview with her to play for the second half of the show, so you can really get steeped into the level of accomplishment and artistry that your instructors have. You know,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Good. So I'm glad we could be a teaser for Kai, because not only is she a wonderful workshop leader, but she's also a fantastic poet.
She is, and she will be reading some of her poetry, so please join us. Second half of the show. Okay.
We are also offering Forest Qigong, and that's happening in Henry Cowell again on Wednesday, August 28th from 10 to 12. And that's led by a very experienced teacher. I've been myself once, and I'm going again next week, joining that
Sweet.
experience. But
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Yeah, so I mean, for just a few days out of the month, you could go into nature and have some really amazing experiences. Animal portrait, pastel painting, just connecting with the forest, yoga, a walk with the doc. It's a really beautiful program. Were you the one that led the development of this curriculum?
Actually, it was a partnership with state parks.
Okay.
And my partner, Elizabeth Hammock, who used to be in charge of the local interpretive division of state parks, she and I worked together very closely to develop this Redwood RX concept. And then we were joined by volunteers, and some of the instructors who are currently teaching these classes came on as consultants. And we did a lot of work with other partners, including the Stanford, I think their official title is the Social Ecology Lab. But they worked with us early on to develop a way that we could get good feedback following our pilot programs to incorporate that into the development of this program. We also were blessed with some funding from outside benefactors and other organizations, and we've used that to help build the program. Last year, our first year, I think we had, if I'm remembering right, something like 16 different experiences offered throughout the season. This year, we've got over 50. So
That is a lot to organize.
It is.
What a gift to the community. How
Yeah.
juicy that is. And in case you've just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD 90.7 in Santa Cruz, 89.5, 89.7 from Watsonville down to the south to King City. My guest is Brenda Holmes, the executive director of the Mountain Parks Foundation, and we are talking about their Redwood RX program. You just heard there's in total going to be for this year 50 different experiences. If you want to see what's on offer, please go to www.mountainparks.org. It is a non-profit nonprofit, which means much, you mentioned all the different services that Mountain Parks Foundation heads up, and it was a long list. You all do a lot related to education. You were describing the museums and the signage and, the docent tours. That is really a lot to head up with a lot of volunteer labor and donations, right?
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. You're right. We are a very small nonprofit with a mighty team of volunteers. And when I say small, it's really, I'm a full-time employee, and we do have another part-time retail manager who helps us run the nature store inside Henry Cowell for our visitors who have been there.
Nice store.
Yeah, and what people may not know is that when you shop at the nature store at Henry Cowell, is the proceeds go directly back into supporting Henry Cowell and Big Basin.
Ooh.
So it's a nonprofit.
Christmas
Mountain
shopping
Parks.
tip there.
Oh, yes.
You guys get good stuff in there.
Yeah, holiday shopping, Mother's Day shopping, birthday shopping. We have a lot of local artists who we partner with, and they show their wares there. And I personally do most of my shopping there, and I know my family loved it in the beginning, and I'm starting to wonder after 13 years if they wish I'd branch out, because everything they say has park logos on it, but maybe not. I think they love it.
I love that. I interview a lot of artists, and I'm thinking that's a really great pairing, right? To go and you could buy people's work and then benefit our lovely parks. And I know I buy an annual pass, and my husband buys an annual pass because he always has it in his car. So I'm like, we'll both do it. And it's so worth it to support these amazing parks. It's a total gift to all of our lives.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And so speaking of supporting Mountain Parks Foundation, how can people do that?
Oh, there are so many ways.
I bet. Tell us about you.
Let me start first just by saying or highlighting something that you mentioned, is that we are a mostly volunteer organization. We really only have we have 4 paid staff members, but 3 of those are part-time staff members. And everything else we do, including running our nature store, which is open 7 days a week, 365 days a year, everything else we do is run by volunteers. So if there are folks in the community who feel called to help support your local Redwood State Parks and you have time to donate, we have got a donate or a volunteer position for you. All of our administrative staff, our bookkeeping staff, our clerk staff at the nature store, all of these folks are volunteers, many of whom have been with us for decades, actually.
That says a lot. And just to give an extra plug, when you volunteer at a mostly volunteer-run organization, you can count on the fact that everybody's there because their heart is in it. So it can be a really great place to hang out and connect, right, with that community.
Absolutely. So there's one way. Another way is to support us financially, which is always needed. Shop in our nature store. That money goes right back into your local parks. Also, support us at our largest, in fact, only annual fundraiser, which some of you may have heard of. It's the Lobster Feed that happens every October inside Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. And this year it's happening on October 12th. You come out, buy a ticket. It's an all-inclusive event. It's 1.5 pounds of fresh Maine lobster flown in from the East Coast with all of the accompaniments, a live band, and an opportunity to spend time outside in nature, enjoying our community with a fabulous feast. So that's another way to support us.
Yeah, and that does sound pretty compelling. Just reading from your website, it's like you've got twinkly lights and it's going to be the Shady Rest Band that's playing. I mean, that's such a gift to hear live music and garlic bread, salad, drinks, dessert, all of it in a place that we love so much. And my understanding is it sells out every year.
It does sell out every year. And I also want to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors. All of our wine is donated by Kissed by an Angel Wines. And then many of our local purveyors of cookies and food also pitch in.
Wonderful.
We've got Wild Roots Market, who gives us most of the produce, including the very popular corn that we use for our corn on the cob.
That's a great little market in Felton.
Yes,
I love
it is.
Yes.
It's a wonderful market. Yeah. And Boulder Creek. They have a location in Boulder Creek. Yeah. So we also couldn't really pull this off, not only without our volunteers, but without our community partners who give really generously.
Isn't that wonderful? All these people that come together because they love our parks and what nature can do for us.
Yes.
You know, as I'm talking to you here, I'm reflecting on all these other people that I've interviewed and learned for the first time about Shinrin-yoku, which most people now are hip to, right? Which is in Japan, if you're having a lot of stress and difficulty, they actually write a prescription for you to spend time in nature, and it's called forest bathing, right? So being out in nature, it's just a gift that's irreplaceable, and we have the capacity to do this in so many ways here in Santa Cruz, but Henry Cowell is kind of one of the heartbeats of this county.
It is. You know, and I will mention too that for our public Redwood RX programs, we, except for one of our programs, Walk with a Doc, we do charge a very small fee to participate.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is because the other part of that program is what we call our belonging program. And we use the money that we earn there and elsewhere to invite organizations from our community in to experience parks in ways that maybe they've never done before. These are groups and organizations that have either never experienced a Redwood State Park, have felt like it was out of their reach for whatever reason, didn't perhaps have the transportation to come. We fund those programs fully for them, and we curate their own Redwood RX experience based on what it is that their members would most like and most benefit from. So
that is huge.
It is. And it's something that we feel really passionate about. And we've worked with many local organizations last year and this year. And we have a continuing growing roster of organizations who we hope to partner with in the future.
Really, really valuable, and another great reason to know about and support Mountain Parks Foundation. I remember learning that there are entire population groups who live in this county. Some of these individuals have never seen the ocean, have never seen a redwood tree. For those that get brought in on programs where they can spend dedicated time, some of these groups, not necessarily the ones you work with, but as they follow these individuals over time who were brought in and given this opportunity, they markedly track toward being more environmentally conscious. Their whole lives change from that opportunity to be in nature. And I know for me, I grew up in Fremont, a pretty cemented city. My mother made sure we went to Yosemite every year, and it centered my life and changed me. So what a beautiful thing. And so it's called the Belonging Program?
The Belonging Program. It's part of our Redwood RX program. But you know, you're right. In general, people support those things that are valuable to them. And if you don't have an experience of what nature might have to offer, you really don't understand the value of something that we all have right in our backyard. And so one of our primary goals is to open the doors in all the ways that we can to everybody to come and experience nature firsthand for themselves. And then they can take that experience and hopefully turn into a lifelong steward of these places, because we need those. We need people to step in where people like you and I will be stepping out someday.
That's right. Well, that's just a beautiful, uplifting note to wrap up our time together. And in case you just tuned in, this is KSQD 90.7 in Santa Cruz, 89.5, 89.7 in Watsonville, Salinas, Monterey, King City. And my guest has been Brenda Holmes, Executive Director of the Mountain Parks Foundation. We are going to take a little transition and listen to a little music from the Shady Rest Band, who will serenade you live when you attend the Mountain Parks Foundation fundraising lobster feed this October 12th. So mark your calendars and visit mountainparks.org to reserve your spot, and stay tuned. We'll be back with more on Talk of the Bay with Kai Seidenberg, whose event with the Mountain Parks Foundation you can experience on Thursday, August 22nd at Fall Creek.
1, 2, 3, 4. Long brown hair and a crooked little smile. You know, I walk right over and we talk for a while. She swears she never been to a crawfish boil, never even set foot on a Cajun soil. Oh my, one look from her blue eyes and I knew there'd be another out of Cajun night. My heart was right in her hands as we danced to the sounds of a Zydeco band.
Hi, I'm Bobby Bishop, host of Be in the Night, bringing you the best I can with jazz, love songs, and soul. Join me on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 10 p.m., playing the classics straight ahead and introducing you to the latest artists and composers. That's Tuesday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. right here on listener-supported KSQD 90.7 FM, Santa Cruz.
Spend your Monday night at the Opera on KSQD Santa Cruz. You'll hear the world's greatest singers tell some of the world's most powerful, romantic, funny, and unforgettable stories, all set to the most glorious music ever composed. It's all about drama and being a diva. Monday night at the Opera, 7 to 10 p.m. on KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM.
Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. Our show is dedicated to the theme of how to connect with our home, this wild and beloved planet. And more particularly, I'm seeking to explore the question of what enables us to better take action on behalf of our biosphere and what feeds our ability to do so. It seems clear that many more of us need to engage if we are to see decisive policies enacted that will benefit the biosphere. And my research is showing that it is really through nourishing our nervous system, connecting with ourselves, each other, as well as to the natural world that gives us the juice and the devotion to be able to choose the road less traveled and exert ourselves in the face of great odds. My guest for the next half hour turns out to be exceptionally qualified to help people drop into this kind of connection with nature and develop an ear for hearing the voice that is attuned to the ancient wisdom of the natural world. Kai Seidenberg is a former educator and organizer who worked in the nonprofit sector promoting sustainable and socially just food systems. Although successful in her field, Kai felt a deeper calling, and in listening to that voice, embarked on the path that led to the development of the novel programs offered through her company, Our Nature Connection. Through this body of work, Kai helps individuals and groups to find simple ways to connect with the earth, cultivate deeper bonds with wild places, and access nature-based healing. Kai is also a poet, and nature is her muse. She has written 2 books, Poems of Earth and Spirit, and Space Between Stones, Poetry and Practices for Connecting with Nature, Spirit, and Creativity. In this pre-recorded interview, you are going to see that Kai embodies peace and presence, which is a precious commodity these days. And I began by asking Kai when she first fell in love with the earth.
First, I just love that question so much. I think we need to ask that question more and just encourage the idea that we can love the earth and be in love with the earth, and that that's actually a natural part of being a human. So, and my answer to that is I don't remember it happening at one point in time or with one experience, but it has happened many times and deepened in many ways, especially in the last 10 years. So I've been fortunate to be going out into the natural world since I was a baby with my family, going hiking, going to the beach, camping. So there's been a lifelong love, and it's always been part of my life. But in the last 10 years, I've learned to open to a much deeper connection and a much deeper love with the natural world. And that has happened really just by slowing down, being quiet, listening, and really being deeply present with the natural world, which is quite different from how our society teaches us to relate to the natural world. We're conditioned to keep moving all the time, to stay busy, hike to a destination, go out with friends, talk the whole time. And that can be great. I've had some of the best experiences of my life doing that. But that conditioning also can keep us from being truly present with the natural world and noticing what's happening around us and engaging with it in a deeper way. I feel like our culture actually teaches us to think and act as though we're separate from the natural world, which keeps us from having the kind of deep love and intimate connection with the natural world, with more than human beings, that's actually a natural part of being human. And it's something that most people have experienced, for millions of years on the history of the earth. It's only pretty recently that we've been taught to see ourselves as separate from nature. So,
absolutely. When you say that, there's a story that bubbles up for me. And I just read it recently, and it was a woman. She's an Apache grandmother, and she describes a scene where her daughter, who is Native, obviously, and then her daughter's friend, who is white, they all go out for a day out on the land. They both had new babies. And she said, and I observed my daughter introduce her child to the earth, to the grass, invited him to explore, maybe taste the grass, be in it. And then she said, and then I observed the white woman, sweet, lovely woman with her baby, and she had brought a blanket and she had brought toys, and she was very careful to make sure the baby didn't get off the blanket, and she was getting the baby to pay attention to those toys. And she said, and by the end of how the day ended was my daughter was off chasing her child as he was out exploring the natural world, and the other child ended the excursion tight in his mother's arms. And that grandmother said, and I saw how one child was being introduced to Gaia and to the natural landscape, and the other child was already being taught that it was separate.
Wow, that is such a powerful story. Thank you for that. That really shows the contrast so clearly. In most Native cultures that I've learned anything about, not that I know about all of them, but it's a very common view to see the natural world and all beings as our relations, as our family, as potential teachers and allies, and to approach them that way and with love and respect, and knowing that we are innately connected with them and that they all have gifts to share with us. So that is a very common view in a lot of indigenous cultures, and it's also something that I have been experiencing more personally as I slowed down and just listened and paid attention and opened myself to the teachings of the natural world. And my experience when we do that is that there are profound gifts and healing that are readily available to us, that are just waiting for us to notice them, to slow down enough to notice and receive them. And I've seen that happening many times when I've guided people into that kind of deeper presence and listening with the natural world, that they have really profound and beautiful experiences, and that it's actually something that can happen pretty easily if we just give it a chance. We just slow down enough, pay attention, get quiet, and open ourselves enough that we can actually notice what's going on and hear the natural world speaking to us, because nature is always speaking and always teaching, and there's so much we can learn and receive from that.
If you have just tuned in, you are listening to Talk of the Bay at KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM. I'm Christine Barrington, and in this pre-recorded interview, I visit with Kai Seidenberg, a poet and nature guide who advocates for tapping into our innate capacity to hear the voice of nature. In this next segment, we explore the power of poetry to connect with this natural voice. And the Shakespeare scholar Jonathan Bate once said that poetry can help save the world. I ask Kai to reflect on this. You talk a lot about listening, and in listening it indicates that there's a voice, there's something coming toward us, an intelligence. And as you open to the natural world, poetry started flowing into you. That's a sense I got from reading your story. Could you speak to the wisdom and the intelligence that speaks specifically through poetry, and what do you think of that quote, that poetry could save our world?
Beautiful question. I love it. I think all kinds of things that are beautiful and true and that invite us into our hearts and remind us what matters can help save the world and help save us. And I definitely believe poetry is one of those things. It's not the only one, and it won't save the world all by itself, but it's part of that. And there is a magic in poetry in that it invites us into a deeper space. It invites us into our hearts and an evocative experience in the moment, often something that is transcendent or beyond just a personal experience. And there's a way that can kind of go past our linear mind and our defenses and our rational arguments and just speak to us and open something deeper and touch something in us. So I know that poetry has that power, and I also know, as you said, that there is so much wisdom and intelligence that speaks through the natural world. As I see it and experience it, all life is intelligent life. All life is communicating all the time, and we can step into that field of wisdom and communication and allow it to speak to us and teach us. And when we're open to that, it can be a very deep and healing experience. And sometimes it's something we can name in words, and sometimes it's deeper than that. It's, at a level that is deeper than words, but it still touches us and speaks to us. And as you mentioned, I started receiving poetry when I began spending a lot of time being quiet and listening to nature. I was in a big transition from work I'd been doing for 25 years, taking a sabbatical, and I just started spending time being quiet in nature. I had no idea I was going to be writing poetry. It wasn't even an aspiration. I had no training in writing poetry. But when I started getting quiet and opening myself to receive from the natural world, poems started coming through, and quite abundantly, too. The first day, I think it was 8 poems in one day, and they just kept coming. And I really believe it's just because I was listening and I was open. They were there. They wanted to be received, and I was available, and so they came through. And that has been just an incredibly magical and rewarding experience for me that has taught me to listen in a different way and to co-create very directly with the natural world and the spirit by just listening for what wants to come through and feeling that and writing it down and staying engaged with that deeper listening rather than running ahead and trying to figure it out and trying to complete it with my little human mind. And that has been just a very powerful and healing experience to create as part of that larger flow in the natural world.
Thinking with the deeper mind reminds me of a quote from Carl Jung where he was always encouraging his clients to listen within to the 1 million year old being within us. He was like, that's what speaks through dreams. That's where the psyche speaks from. And you talk about, there's an intelligence in poetry, and I'm wondering what you feel the nature of that intelligence is and why it might be critical, particularly at this time. And you really have spoken somewhat to it already, but I'm going to invite you to say a little bit more because I think it's really important. And then if you have a poem that you would like to share, I would love to invite you to do that as well.
So what is the nature of the intelligence in poetry? There is an intelligence that comes from listening for what wants to emerge from a deeper place. And honestly, I don't know exactly what that place is or where it's coming from, but my sense is that it is something deeper and wiser than my individual linear mind, and that it is connected with something much greater and wiser than myself. So I experience that as the natural world. I experience it as source or creative energy that is abundant and present in the universe and that wants to come through, that is looking for human hosts to receive it. So I do feel like my experience is that there is this larger intelligence and larger wisdom that is in our universe, that is in the natural world, that is in all life, that is more ancient, it's deeply rooted, it's embedded in this brilliant, complex web of life and millions of years of evolutionary intelligence, and, the deeper realm of spirit as well, and that intelligence that's beyond the physical 3D world, but is very real. So I do feel like there is a deeper intelligence that is connected with all that life force in the natural world and the spirit world that does go beyond what we can imagine with our own linear minds, especially when we're hurried, especially when we're stressed, especially when we're moving too fast, which is what our society and our technology conditions us to do. So I believe when we slow down and get quiet and listen more deeply, we can hear both that deeper voice within that you mentioned, that Carl Jung talks about, and a deeper voice that comes, from the larger world and the spirit world, and that those are very connected. And that when we're listening for that deeper intelligence in nature from the spirit world, it calls forth our own deep, innate intelligence and helps us remember who we are and why we're here.
This is KSQD Santa Cruz. I'm Christine Barrington for Talk of the Bay, and we are sitting down with Kai Seidenberg, poet and founder of Our Nature Connection, a nature wellness program that teaches people about the power of deep listening to elicit the intelligent voice of nature within us.
So you asked for a poem, and I will share one that I consider one of my foundational poems. And this came through on the Pine Ridge Trail in Big Sur. Most of my poems are co-created with the natural world and come through when I'm in nature. And I have a small disclaimer, which is that this poem, I wish, had a word that means one living being that's not gendered, that we had a commonly understood for that word for that in our language. We don't have that word yet. They is what we're using for now, but I use gendered pronouns in here for things that most people would think don't really have gender or don't have a clear gender, because I don't like to use it when I'm talking about living beings and intelligent beings. Okay, so that disclaimer aside, here's a poem that comes from the Big Sur Mountains, and it's called What If? What if the leaves, stirred to singing by the breeze, sing with even more joy when they notice you are listening? What if the small white flower quivers with delight when you notice her tiny yet honorable contribution to the beauty of this world? And what if that brief moment is all she needs to know that her life is worth living, all her efforts not in vain? What if the trees feel the depth of your pain and are quietly reaching toward you, offering solace with everything they have to give? What if the whales, diving into the deep blue, can feel your love for them, even across all that open ocean? What if the water, weary from her endless journey, is replenished by your gratitude, which gives her the strength to keep going? What if the earth herself longs to feel the caress of your naked feet on her warm, brown skin? And what if the granite mountain, no matter how remote and immovable he may seem, feels a quiet shiver of joy when you are touched by his majestic beauty? What if?
Wow. Taking in those rich what ifs, I think what if can be one of the most powerful opening inquiries that we could ever offer ourselves. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a good poem is worth like 1,000 feelings and impressions. You get ushered in almost to another dimension so quickly. And what I noticed listening to your poem there was almost like this nourishing water was coming into my nervous system and soothing me. And that's really kind of what you're saying with these what ifs. And it felt like a very powerful transmission. And given how stressed so many beings are on this planet right now, with so many crises happening, I feel nourishment for our nervous system and our heart is the most important resource that we need in order to connect with something that will help us meet this moment in time. And I think so your poem, I think, is a beautiful embodiment of an aspect of like poetry has a powerful role to serve in the transformation of the world into one that is life generating, life sustaining, life giving. That was beautiful. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
What I sense also in your relationship with nature and the offerings that you give the world is also our coming home to the fact that we have something to give. Like in your poem, you talk about offering our gratitude to the ocean, say, and I think there's a way that modern culture, there's a lot of mental illness. You know, there's a disease of the heart because many people think they don't matter. Yeah. And so as we begin to wind down this interview, I'd like to invite you to speak to our value, what we have to give back to the world through our presence, through anything that arises to you, because each of us matters. Each of us has gift to offer, and when we go out, we're receiving a lot from nature, and we have something to give. It matters, and I'm wondering if you would speak to that.
Yes. Thank you for that question. I love it. And I absolutely believe that every single person matters, that we are all here because, we all have gifts to give, and that most of us have much more impact on others than we realize and give much more than we realize. And it is a very sad thing that there are so many people who have the idea that they don't matter. Being in nature, having connection with the natural world, I feel like I know it's one of the most inspiring things we can do. It's really clear. It's very good for our creativity. It's good for our sense of well-being. It just helps us feel good in all kinds of ways. It resources us. It gives us inspiration and hope. So in all kinds of ways, it can help us feel better and help us have the strength and the hope to notice that we matter and that we can make an impact. And I think it also, if we give it a chance, can speak to us very deeply about who we are and what matters, and actually help us remember who we are and know who we really are and know what we're here to give. That's, for me, one of the greatest gifts that I've received from listening to the natural world is much more clarity about my own path and gifts and what I'm here to give. And, I feel like the natural world is calling to us right now, inviting us in, asking us to listen, because it can give us so much and it can help us through this time, both for ourselves, for our own well-being, just our own ability to stay sane and healthy and, grounded in a stressful world, and by giving us the energy and the strength and the inspiration to take positive action and make a difference. And I want to say it, I know this both from experience and from the research. It's very clear that contact with nature has positive impact on people's behavior and values. It makes people less aggressive, more cooperative, more creative, more resilient and flexible. In all kinds of ways, it's clear that contact with nature actually really makes us better people and teaches us how to live, in harmonious way with other people and the earth. It's also very clear that...
Wise words from Kai Seidenberg, founder of Our Nature Connection, which creates programs and resources that inspire people to connect with nature as a path to greater peace, joy, and healing in their lives and in the world. Check out her website, OurNatureConnection.com to discover the rich array of programs on offer. You can also experience a mini treat with Kai through the Mountain Parks Foundation's Redwood RX program. She'll be leading a mindfulness-based mini retreat in Fall Creek Thursday, August 22nd. Visit mountainparks.org to register and discover the world of Redwood RX. This has been Talk of the Bay on K-Squid, your community radio station for all of the Monterey Bay Area, on 90.7 FM in Santa Cruz, 89.5 and 89.7 from Watsonville to Salinas, Monterey, and beyond. I'm Christine Barrington. Join us every weekday at 5 p.m. for more on Talk of the Bay.